So here's the facts, ladies and gentlemen. The FBI is now threatening me to prosecute me for violation of the Electronic Spam Act. And get this, you won't believe this. What they're saying is it's against the law for me to whistleblow and send emails to the FBI, SEC, and DOJ for cases they don't want to hear about concerning Wall Street fraud. I'm the whistleblower in the Tom Petters, Mark Dreyer, Larry Reynolds, who also was Larry Rezovitz in Witness Protection Program that laundered $12 billion for the Tom Petters Ponzi. The stage door case I'm a whistleblower in, the KB case, the Toys R Us is the one that I want to talk to them about now. And the FBI has actually blocked my email from forwarding facts about crimes on their online tip site, where I wanted to point out that Romney deliberately tanked Toys R Us. He slaughtered Toys R Us for his own personal gain. It didn't have to die. Romney's one of the major creditors in there, or GSachs Bain Cap is one of the major creditors in there. And again, none of us know the deal about it. You know, Romney claimed that he left Bain Capital in 1999. We all know that's a lie, moveon.org. And others took the information I provided in 2012. And you can see politicasusa.com story, Meet the Man Battling Romney for 12 years. Or you can see Firedog Lake's story about Goldman Sachs and unending eToys bankruptcy, or New York Times 2013. The story was rigging the IPO game. You know, they're doing fraud all over the place, and I got confessions. But the U.S. Attorney Combe Connolly in Delaware was a partner of the Morris Nichols Arsentunnel law firm, who was my attorney. I was the CEO, in essence, of eToys during the bankruptcy, and also eToys' attorney. And Morris Nichols Arsentunnel, while lying under oath and concealing the fact that it was also Bain Capital and Goldman Sachs attorney, destroyed the evidence, asked for the destruction of books and records early on in the eToys case to make sure Goldman Sachs wouldn't be prosecuted. And to further assure that issue, Combe Connolly, the assistant United States attorney, when Goldman Sachs took us public, eToys public in 1999, the stock went for $85 a share, and that's what New York Times points out, that eToys got less than 20, and the New York Times reporter even found a smoking gun where Goldman Sachs bragged and bet that the stock would hit 80. You know, so, and the New York Supreme Court of Appeals gave us the right to sue Goldman Sachs in 2013 for breach of fiduciary duty, taking us public. But Morris Nichols Arsentunnel, which is MNAT.com, settled the eToys versus Goldman Sachs lawsuit by nominating Paul Traub to prosecute Goldman Sachs without Goldman Sachs attorney MNAT or Sullivan and Cromwell, who was representing Goldman Sachs in the case, disclosing that MNAT was Goldman Sachs attorney. So Sullivan and Cromwell was guilty of this. And Jay Clayton, I sued to block him to become the director of the commissioner of the SEC. I sued Trump, the SEC, Jay Clayton, DOJ, FBI on March 22nd, 2017 in D.C. Federal District Court, and the clerk refused to put the thing in the docket record, and that's a crime. They put it in 9 weeks later after Jay Clayton was confirmed, and the result is that Jay Clayton is heading the SEC, and he's burying the Goldman Sachs Bain Capital case. He was partners of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is complicit in the crime. He was invested in Bain Capital, which is cui bono of the crime. And these guys, Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital, also ripped off Mattel for $4 billion. Combe Connolly was the assistant U.S. attorney in Delaware where the merger happened, and Bain Capital merged the learning company into Mattel for $4 billion in 1999 when eToys went public, again for billions of dollars, but we only got $160 million. And Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital benefited from that, and they benefited from the Fingerhut fraud, and they benefited from the Tom Petters Ponzi, and they benefited from the Mark Dreyer fraud and Paul Traub fraud and the KB fraud. So M&AT lies under oath to become the eToys debtor counsel and my counsel, court-approved counsel, for my handling and running eToys. And they were going to sell eToys to Bain Capital KB for $5.4 million. I stopped that, and I was getting tens of millions of dollars. And so what Paul Traub and M&AT did was they asked the U.S. trustee if they could replace me. And the U.S. trustee on February 15, 2005, testified that they told them not to be conflicted, have a conflict of interest in replacing me as eToys CEO. But Paul Traub put in his law firm partner and lied about it, Barry Gold, who also worked for Mitt Romney at Bain Capital, with Michael Glazier as director at Bain Capital, Barry Gold as the director's assistant, and they hired Paul Traub. And they all move over to eToys and lie under oath and pretend that they're arm's length from each other. Matter of fact, Barry Gold testified in his declaration under penalty of perjury that he was extensively arm's length, good faith negotiations between debtor and creditor, which is impossible because Barry Gold, the eToys CEO, after they illegally locked me out, was partners of Paul Traub him personally, and also a paid member of the Paul Traub, Bonnequist and Fox law firm. So they confessed that part of it, and Paul Traub disbanded TBF, Traub, Bonnequist and Fox, and Paul Traub became partners of Mark Dreyer. And then Mark Dreyer went to jail. And Paul Traub's other partner, Tom Petters, went to jail. But Paul Traub always gets away with it because he's the brown bag king of New York. He knows which judges and which federal agents get the blessing of the brown bags so that Mitt Romney and Bain Capital can get away with Wall Street fraud. The thing is, there's people dead in this case. They told eToys shareholder Robert Albert, who joined me in 2005, people like you who don't take a bribe wake up dead. And then they tried to kill him. Jack Abramoff got out early, and you can look this up, guys. Johan Hammerski bragged that he was Paul Traub's, Jack Abramoff's partner, right? Johan Hammerski is the one that threatened Robert Albert. And then when Abramoff got out early, I warned Robert Albert that Abramoff got out early. And Gary Ramsey, who co-owned the house of Robert Albert, vanished into thin air, and then Michael Sazoff in Kingman, Arizona tried to assassinate Robert Albert, and Robert Albert shot and killed him. But the devastation of Robert Albert's friend Gary Ramsey betraying him and leaving him hopefully for dead, whatever he got to do that, ripped Albert apart. He woke up dead anyway, right? And Marty Lackner and James Lackner are brothers. James Lackner is the assistant U.S. attorney in Minnesota. This is what they do. They own the U.S. attorneys and the assistant U.S. attorney prosecutors. Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital gave $50 million to Fingerhut right before the FBI raided Tom Petters' Ponzi. So the receiver never seized Fingerhut, right? But they seized Polaroid, which Paul Traub and Tom Petters owned. And then they sold it to Paul Traub, which is the same thing as seizing Al Capone's assets and giving it to Frank Nitti, right? And they sold it to Paul Traub, Gordon Brothers, Hilco Great American for $83 million. And then all of a sudden, Paul Traub becomes the partners of Gordon Brothers owning Polaroid, and they announce a $2 billion license deal that nobody knew about during the auction. Ain't that friggin' great? I mean, things are unreal. They do this shit all over the place. So Jay Clayton gets nominated and confirmed because the clerk of court knew that my filing the case against Trump, it's Haas v. Trump, and I also sued the SEC and everybody else to block Jay Clayton because he's partners of Sullivan Cromwell, and Sullivan Cromwell's involved in the eToys federal bankruptcy case fraud and eToys New York Supreme Court fraud, right? They're successful with that, and Colm Connolly, the assistant U.S. attorney over the Fingerhut, eToys, and Mattel cases and KB cases, he becomes partners of M&AT from 1999 to 2001. And if you remember, Mitt Romney claimed when he ran against Obama in 2012 that he was retroactively retired from August 2001 back to February 11th, 1999, the same exact time that Colm Connolly was a partner of Mitt Romney and Bain Capital's law firm of M&AT. Then they offered me a $1 million bribe, and I reported to the Delaware Department of Justice, which I'm supposed to do. You try to bribe a public company a CEO during a bankruptcy, right? It's a crime. And they locked me out of the building. M&AT forges a Haas affidavit. My name's Laser Stephen Haas. They forge a Haas affidavit as my attorney, give it to the court without telling me, and claim that I waived millions of dollars in fees and expenses and gave away eToys for free. And the judge accepted that, even after M&AT confessed that it lied under oath about Goldman Sachs. And Barry Gold and Paul Traub confessed that they concealed their relationship and said, we just made a mistake. Well, the thing is, the judge told them to come clean. The thing they haven't told you is that Michael Glazier was director at Stage Stores that filed bankruptcy in 2000. That was the year that Bain Capital also bought KB, and Michael Glazier was the CEO. I pointed this out to Matt Taibbi at Rolling Stone, and that was part of his cover story in September 2012, Greed and Debt, a true story about Mitt Romney and Bain Capital. But it's not the whole story, right? These guys are ripping us off left and right, and they're rigging the Department of Justice, and nobody gives a shit. And the big thing about all this is what they're betraying. Pay attention to this, folks. What they're betraying is lawyers are betraying their court-approved clients on a regular basis and stabbing them in the gut and making them bleed to death. And Chief Justice Mary F. Walworth didn't care. The U.S. Trustee Program trial attorney Mark Kennedy didn't care. But Lawrence Friedman, the Deputy Director of the Department of Justice that was head of the U.S. Trustee Program, emailed me a promise that he was on top of it. And then the next thing you know, while he's punishing Paul Traub and eToys, they're over pulling a $100 million fraud in KB. M&AT represents Bain Capital of the $83 million that Michael Glazier, as CEO of KB, paid to Bain Capital before they filed bankruptcy. Now, if you and I took $83 million out of our house before we filed bankruptcy, we go to jail. But not if you're Mitt Romney and Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital. You get a slap on the wrist. They didn't even slap him on the wrist. Mitt Romney was double-dipping the KB case, and that's also a crime. He didn't disclose his relationship. Big Lots was being represented by M&AT, and they did find out through my information that the M&AT was representing Bain Capital while they were representing Big Lots against Bain Capital, because M&AT, Bain Capital bought KB from Big Lots Consolidated Stores. And get this, Paul Traub is the creditor's attorney that asked to prosecute Glazier and Bain, right? And M&AT and Sullivan and Cromwell and Combe Connolly, now as U.S. attorney, he returned in August 2001, is now the top dog federal prosecutor, and he doesn't disclose that these guys are all related. All they do is merry-go-round from one case to the other. KB, eToys were in bankruptcy multiple times. Parent company, FAO Schwartz, Zany Brainy. Paul Traub's involved with all of them as the creditors counsel, but Bain Capital always gets a deal. But Romney owned Stage Stores. Michael Glazier was their director, along with Jack Bush of Dallas, Texas. By the way, most people don't know that Bush and Romney are distant cousins, right? And Barry Gold was the director assistant. That's public knowledge in the Stage Stores case. And Barry Gold is the direct signature party that hired Paul Traub for the Stage Store case, and they got caught. And Paul Traub had to file a bankruptcy rule 2014-2016 supplemental affidavit to explain his previous relationships that he didn't disclose to Barry Gold. And what the judge did in that case is Dove Avni, AVNI, was reporting that shenanigans were going on. He owned 4,500 in stock. The bankruptcy judge, who doesn't have the right to do it, sanctioned Dove Avni, saying there was no issues of anything wrong, for $300,000 and sent the U.S. Marshals out to collect after him 6 times. It's absurd. John Ashcroft tried to help and stop the bankruptcy fraud, and he wrote a letter that Francis C.P. Knize talked about on a public recording hearing of the Government and Sunshine Act in 2007. Ashcroft said the #1 problem with corruption in the United States is corrupt federal judges and collusion with high-ranking members of the U.S. Trustee's Office. And then John Ashcroft got a $50 million no-bid deferred prosecution agreement from Chris Christie. And conveniently, one of the future no-bid deferred prosecution agreements was Chris Christie's brother. The other party that was involved in that was Deborah Yang, the U.S. attorney that was out in California where eToys' office was, that was head of the Public Corruption Task Force and President Bush's Corporate Fraud Task Force over Enron and WorldCom. She's part of Ashcroft, getting $50 million, and then a statement of Ashcroft disappeared. And lawyers and prosecutors and journalists all said I fabricated it. It was a made-up statement. Well, guess what? They look like fools now because uscourts.gov has Francis C.P. Kanize's testimony, read about Ashcroft's statement, and the transcript of it on their website. And Combe Connolly's resume pointing out that he was an assistant U.S. attorney, that he clerked for Judge Walter K. Stapleton at the Third Circuit, became assistant U.S. attorney, and Walter K. Stapleton was a partner of M&AT, and then Combe Connolly became a partner of M&AT, and then Combe Connolly went back to the Department of Justice as U.S. attorney from 2001 to 2008. I'm handing that guy the evidence, and he's telling me there are no cases. And his assistant U.S. attorney, Ellen Slites, tells me I'm wasting their time. But Combe Connolly never discloses that he's partners of M&AT, which represents Bain Capital and Goldman Sachs. Right? It's an incestuous, systemic bankruptcy, fraud, corruption. You need to see Lynn Lopucky, UCLA law professor Lynn Lopucky's book, Courting Failure, how big fee bankruptcy cases are corrupting the federal bankruptcy court. And Senators Elizabeth Warren and John Cornyn joined together trying to do a bankruptcy venue bill to take away picking the venue of Delaware, because Senator Cornyn said what's a fact. Picking a venue is the same thing as picking a verdict. And that's absurd that we allow that to happen. Right? People are dead. The brother of Assistant U.S. Attorney James Lackner was Marty Lackner. He was involved in the Petters Ponzi fraud with Paul Traub and Tom Petters. He was going to give me a file case, and he wound up dead in his closet. Right? And the Wall Street Journal says that's not a story. The New York Times says it's not a story. How is the person that is the federal prosecutor over a case that's related to dozens of Ponzi schemes, Greg Bell, Sky Bell, Lancelot, Rothstein, Descala, Palm Beach Link Capital, Frank Venice Metrogem, Larry Reynolds. Larry Reynolds laundered $12 billion for Tom Petters while he was in the witness protection program. And that SOB sat 25 feet away from me and had my daughter kidnapped. They told me my daughter was first, my son would be next. All this stuff goes on, and they tell you don't waste your time. Sending this stuff to the Department of Justice, FBI, and the SEC is a crime. It's a violation of the Electronic Spam Act. Are they out of their friggin' minds? What, you know, these suckers need to be lined up and thrown in a ditch and buried so they can't harm it. People don't realize when these guys steal billions and trillions, Toys R Us goes out of business. Those 30,000 jobs didn't have to disappear. They disappeared because Romney filed bankruptcy on Clear Channel Communications. Do you know where he got Clear Channel Communications from? Red McCombs. You know what Red McCombs owns? Blackwater. I'm messing with guys that have access to mercenaries, but guess what? Guess who got his $50 million no-bid deferred prosecution agreement and then went to Blackwater? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, John Ashcroft. The piles all together. They know how to rip us off. And they make us foot the bill of paying the bribes of them getting away with their dirty deeds. And enough is enough already. These millionaires and billionaires ripping us off and corrupting the Department of Justice must stop now. Please help spread the word about this. I may be dead soon. Romney's going to be senator. He's planning to run for president starting August 2019. They got to get rid of me before then. Robert Alber dead. Anna Schaefer dead. Jack Wheeler dead. Marty Lackner, the brother of assistant U.S. attorney that was involved in the Tom Petters Ponzi scheme, was never prosecuted. He wound up dead in his closet, 40 years old, 3 kids, a young wife. Never prosecuted and no note. It begs 1,000 questions. What did he and his brother talk about? When did Minnesota DOJ office know about it? How can Minnesota DOJ prosecute a case that they're directly involved in, that they got connections to? Did James Lackner get any gifts, Christmas or anything, from his brother? That's a bribery, right? Did they destroy any emails? When did they tell DC that they were involved? Why didn't the public integrity section take over the case? Why did Senator Biden fly on Sun Country Airlines for free and get fined $219,000? That's right. He was arm in arm with Tom Petters and Paul Traub on their airline when he ran for president in 2008. You didn't hear about that, did you? Because they made the pictures disappear, but we've got them. Biden tries to run for president, and we're going to report about it. right? You know, he stopped Connolly from becoming a judge, so I've left him alone. In 2008, he refused to sign the Senate slip, but Trump, getting away with nominating Connolly for the SEC, is now brazenly nominated, Jay Clayton. They nominated Jay Clayton and did the scheme of blocking my case in court to get Jay Clayton confirmed to run the SEC. Now, it's been a year. Those guys got the brief. The FBI got the brief, the SEC got the brief, the DOJ got the brief, the court got the brief, and nobody's done nothing about this case. They can't, because if they do any prosecution against Mitt Romney, that's why Trump and them are hugging, kissing, and getting along with each other. They have to also prosecute Goldman Sachs, and Trump can't prosecute Goldman Sachs. So Trump is obstructing justice, blocking the eToys case from being prosecuted by his prosecutors to protect Goldman Sachs. So he has to protect Mitt Romney in order to protect Goldman Sachs. Nobody knows what other schemes are going on, but what we do know is that we have over 100 crimes. Marty Lackner dead, Anna Schaefer dead, Jack Wheeler dead, Robert Albert dead, Michael Sazoff dead, and they're all connected to our case, and nobody's doing a damn thing. They're all saying it's not newsworthy story, it's buried and over with. And they'll say the same thing about me. I'm insignificant. I mean nothing. But it's not about what they're doing to me. It's about what they're doing to us. We can't have Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital own federal prosecutors, because that means they own us. And that's unacceptable. It's intolerable, and it's inexplicable that tax-paid public servants are turning a blind eye to this. But there's many more of us than they are of them. If you will help spread the word on this story, the house of cards, the facts are all public docket records. We don't need a single piece of discovery to turn around and put Paul Traub in jail, Barry Golden in jail, Connolly, a federal prosecutor that buried a case and people wound up dead, needs his bar license yanked and needs to be thrown in jail. And he needs to be investigated about Jack Wheeler's death, because Jack Wheeler died after visiting the Nemours building, and Connolly and the U.S. Attorney's Office was in the Nemours building. When I reported on that, a few weeks later, Connolly panicked and he volunteered to become the Wheeler family widow's attorney and offered a $25,000 reward for all the information to go to him. But these cases have never been investigated or prosecuted, and the big thing that they're hiding from everybody is M&AT worked for Bain Capital. Barry Gold worked for Bain Capital. Paul Traub worked for Bain Capital. That means Mark Dreyer worked for Bain Capital. Tom Petters worked for Bain Capital. And Goldman Sachs is partners with Bain Capital. So Goldman Sachs ripped off eToys IPO, and their lawyers lied to become eToys debtor counsel, nominated Paul Traub, a Ponzi schemer with Mark Dreyer and Tom Petters, to prosecute Goldman Sachs in the New York Supreme Court. And when the New York Supreme Court of Appeals said that we could sue and go forward with our case, they buried the billion-dollar case for $7.5 million and publicly argued about how the lawyers would split up the money. It's all a joke, ladies and gentlemen. Your system of justice is a system of injustice. Repeatedly, continuously, and almost always. The Delaware Bankruptcy Court corporate dominance is a den of iniquity. Mark Kenney, Roberta DeAngelis, Kelly B. Stapleton, Judge Mary F. Walrath, and anybody else that had a hand in this case. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellen Slights is still at the Department of Justice in Delaware, had FBI agent Scott Duffy call me 3 days after Robert Albert died and threatened me if I didn't back off that they were going to prosecute me. And I told him to go fuck himself, and I sent them an email to go fuck themselves. He said, you can't do that to an FBI agent. I said, I'm not talking to an FBI agent. I'm talking to a racketeer. Do we allow racketeers to run our country? I say hell no. Do you say hell no? Do you care? If you care, pass the word out. This is Laser Stephen Haas telling you, death or high water, I'm not quitting until justice comes.